Okay, guys, today we're going to talk about the Articles of Confederation, which was the first government of the United States. Remember, yesterday I talked about the fact that each of the 13 newly created states functioned as small independent countries, but that they agreed to join together for common purpose. And as long as the revolution was going on, that, of course, was their goal. But once the revolution is over, they start becoming rather self-centered again. I guess might be a good way to explain it. And it's going to lead to some problems that they're going to have to deal with. The Articles of Confederation, first of all, I want you to think about that term, confederation. And how does a confederation function? In a confederation, it is a group of independent states who join together for that common purpose. But the state and the government of the state is superior to the government of the whole. In other words, the national government can do very limited things, but then it's up to each state to decide whether they want to actually enforce that or not. So we'll talk a little bit more about this. It can get kind of confusing because it seems backwards. In the Articles of Confederation, and now this is drafted and eventually ratified during the Revolution, but it was very simple. There was one House, there was one Congress. It consisted of one group. Each state got one vote. So regardless of the size of the population of a state, every state got one vote in the Congress under the Articles. It took 9 out of 13 states to pass a law, which is more than a majority. It was unanimous, or it had to be unanimous in order to make an amendment. To get a unanimous vote would be almost impossible. So it was very, very loosely structured, and it was very weak. Few things that they were allowed to do under this government was continue fighting the war, make treaties with foreign countries, borrow money, but they could not do some of the basic functions we think of government as doing. They could not tax. They could not regulate trade. They didn't even have an executive to enforce the laws that this Congress made. So very weak and totally dependent on the willingness of the states to cooperate. Sometimes the states are very cooperative, sometimes they're not. The states could voluntarily loan money to the national government, but they didn't have to. So a lot of what would seem to us as unusual powers that were denied to government, because the very things we think of government as existing for were that weren't able to be accomplished under the Articles of Confederation. It took several years from the writing of the Articles of Confederation to the ratification because of the issue of Western land. And if you look in your textbook on page 172, there's a map, and you can see what I'm talking about. All of the land that Great Britain had received from France as a result of the French and Indian War, the Ohio River Valley, and kind of the Mississippi River area, was British territory, but it had not been organized into colonies. And so each colony that had a western boundary wanted to be able to extend their colony all the way to the Mississippi River. Colonies who did not have a western boundary, such as Delaware or New Jersey, are going to be greatly opposed to that. They have nowhere else to grow. And so they are reluctant to allow the other colonies to extend westward. So they keep delaying ratification of the Articles of Confederation over this Western land agreement. Finally, in order to get it passed, the states, particularly Virginia and Maryland, agree to give up all of that land, and all of the colonies finally agree that all of that land will be given or under the control of the new Congress that's created by the Articles of Confederation. And so the ratification takes place, and we have this new, very weak government in a Confederate form. Now, two things that happened that Congress did well under the Articles of Confederation was provide for the future sale and government for this territory that they received during the ratification process. The first one is the Land Ordinance of 1785. This law established rules for surveying and then selling the western lands. And this deals with predominantly what we call the Northwest Territory. Now, our western boundary at the end of the Civil War is the Mississippi River, not the Pacific Ocean. So Northwest is referring to Indiana, Ohio, Illinois, Michigan, Wisconsin, Minnesota, that area. And you can see it in your book on the map, it's orange. This land was divided into 1 acre squares. 600 squares was a township. And the sale of the 16th section would go to support public education within that township. So forward thinking that some sort of basic schooling would be government supported as far back as the Revolution. After the land was surveyed and divided up and eventually sold, then the Northwest Ordinance, passed in 1787, established rules for how territories could become new states. They granted limited self-government in the territories. The governing of those territories until they reached statehood would be left up to the National Congress. And a very important provision that we will be talking about more and more is that slavery was prohibited in these newly created territories and eventually states. The last major accomplishment, of course, of the national government under the Articles of Confederation was winning the Revolution. Winning the Revolution was the focus, and establishing how we're going to settle new lands, the next major focus. But that's really all that was accomplished. The states were in control of their own fate. We talked yesterday about their writing their state constitutions, and they were much more complex and dealt with more issues than the national government did. Problems that existed under the Articles are going to continually grow the further we go in time from the end of the Revolution. But major ones were financial. There was no way to pay our debts from the war because the government couldn't tax. Secondly were foreign problems. Great Britain, even though they promised that they would abandon the Ohio River Valley after the Revolution as part of the treaty, they still had British soldiers stationed all along the Ohio River Valley. So we basically had foreign troops within our borders after we won independence. Lastly, domestic problems, no ability to regulate trade. Because each state was independent, they could do all of the things a country can do. They had their own money. They were considering, some of them, making their own treaties with foreign countries, which meant if they're going to get exclusive trade or they're going to work out agreements with foreign countries, let's say for the benefit of Virginia, then the rest of the states are going to suffer as a result of that treaty. And finally, we have a major rebellion in Massachusetts led by Daniel Shays, and this is Shays' Rebellion. It's really going to sort of be the spark that ignites the talk of creating a stronger national government. Daniel Shays was a fairly typical farmer in Massachusetts. He had served in the war, but he had never been paid for his service. and his lands, as well as the lands of many Massachusetts farmers, were about to be foreclosed on by the state. And he said, wait a minute, this really isn't fair. I can't pay this because I haven't been paid from the years I fought in the Revolution. And he led a rebellion in Massachusetts. Now, the government of Massachusetts was able to stop the rebellion from spreading, but it was a very real threat. Something you need to think about is, when do we have too much democracy? If you feel justified in rebelling every time you feel the government is violating your rights, would we be in constant rebellion? So Shays' rebellion and this threat of violence, once again, is going to draw the attention of some major players in the states. George Mason, George Washington, and the different states are going to begin talking about, what do we need to do? If we had a stronger government, we could avoid some of these problems. And so tomorrow I'll talk about the call for and the beginnings of the Constitutional Convention. Have a good evening. I'll see you tomorrow.